And a very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Issues and Attitudes. My name is Jeff Owens. My new co-host this semester is Gerard Singleton. Welcome, Gerard.
How's it going? Good to be here, Jeff.
Good. And our guest making a repeat appearance today is Mr. Aydin Tariq, the former Illinois Hearing Center Task Force Policy Chairman.
Well, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Gerard, for having me back on the show to talk about my experience.
And what's really cool today is we have guests in the studio as well. You brought some folks from the LIFT program in Mattoon who are here to watch and grade us or whatever. So
right, serving as our live studio audience.
So we have to be extra special good today. So thanks. That's a good idea you had.
Of course, and thank you for giving them the experience and the educational experiences to learn.
So you are a senior at Mattoon High School, and you're going to graduate in May, I assume, right?
Yes.
And last time you were here, you had just finished a thing working with PBS and about journalism. Before we get into the main topic while you're here today, can you recap that experience for the folks who may have missed that, just what you did and learned?
Of course, yeah. It's been a whole 2 years.
2 years.
The last time that I was on Issues and Attitudes, back in the middle of my sophomore year. And in that appearance, I had just been appointed to PBS's nationwide student advisory team. Through that experience, I got to advise PBS and PBS executive producers about stories pertaining to young people, including gun violence, climate change, educational policy. And I also got to make student-produced stories for PBS, including some with many sports players. We did some on mental health, and we even put out an almost hour-long documentary about gun violence and how it affects young people. I credit my experience with PBS as I learned a lot from my experience with PBS, and also I credit it a lot to my growth in joining activism and feeling the confidence to spread my advocacy.
That's cool. And then you, as a high school student, you got to work with the Lieutenant Governor Stratton. Talk about the experience, and before we get into some details of what you actually accomplished, but just doing something like what you done. Explain that.
It was unlike anything I had experienced before. It was the opportunity to serve both the state and the young people in the state on the task force, and also to know that I was making meaningful policy change regarding mental health and regarding trauma-informed care in the state of Illinois was important to me. And it was a very valuable experience, especially under the leadership of Lieutenant Governor Stratton. I had met her previously in regards to other legislative work I had done, but when you have a conversation with her and her leadership style, you can tell she really cares about the state. She cares about the work that she's doing, and working under her and working with the other wonderful people in the task force was just incredible.
Sure.
I'd ask, how did the opportunity come about to work with Governor Stratton? I mean, that's as a young person, that's obviously a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So I just want to know, how did you go about, procuring that?
Yeah, I have been involved in some form of public policy or activism for about 4 years now. In 2021, and we mentioned it in my last interview on Issues and Attitudes, I started the Teen Collective Project, which was a local organization dedicated to rural mental health. Through that, I also got involved in more mental health advocacy and more mental health activism. And late 2023, I got involved with the Illinois Children's Mental Health Partnership. They work with Lurie Children's Hospital to make policy and mental health policy in the state of Illinois with State Senator Mike Simmons. He's from the Chicagoland area. I did research and policy for them on their committee, and through that, as the state was looking for members of this new task force, they wanted some youth representation. And so the email came down to me, and it was like, the Lieutenant Governor's office and the Lurie Children's Hospital and the Children's Mental Health Partnership was like, we like your leadership and your research and just the way you carry yourself. Why don't you serve on this task force for the state?
The question I also want to talk about is, as a young person, you realized that mental health was a hot topic, and it was really a topic that for the past 6-7 years in this country has, I don't think the word taken off is the right way to say it, but it really has become more prevalent. So why and how, was there a moment in your life you said, this is my thing, this is what I need to do? Because you said you had kind of a calling for it.
Yeah, I think it was following the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, mental health was an issue before then, and mental illness was unfortunately very widespread. But the COVID-19 pandemic brought those issues, and specifically youth mental health issues, to the forefront of media and public concern. Now that we've done more research on it, we know that 1 in 5 young people in America are diagnosed with mental illness, and the CDC believes it could be as many as 3 in 5. 1 in 10 young people will have attempted suicide at some point during their high school years. As I began to learn this as a young person, as I began to struggle with mental illness and mental battles of my own, it was sort of that realization that somebody needs to do something about this. And I had a place of privilege. I had a place of advocacy that I could stand up and say, okay, I want to make the change that young people like me deserve to see.
I think that's really awesome. And I know you brought in the pandemic and how that kind of gave everyone the time and the space to be with themselves and kind of realize how mental health is more of a bigger aspect of our everyday lives than people were taking, well, as people took it for prior to the pandemic. So I would ask, like, as it is now, as we're past that point, what are some of the things you're focusing on now in terms of mental health? Like, what are the current state of your goals?
I think right now, one of our biggest concerns that we're looking at is funding, and mental health funding both in rural communities and for youth communities. In rural communities, it's estimated that 65% of rural communities live in what is designated as like a lack of mental health care zone. And this means that actually 60% of those don't have a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a therapist affordable within driving range. That's a large portion of America. And not only that, many school counselors in schools for young people don't have the training necessary to deal with the mental illness that is so widespread within our schools. And so one of the things we were talking about on this task force is how can we get more money to mental health care in our rural communities? How can we destigmatize the conversation of mental health care? And then also, how can we make sure that mental health care is more affordable to people? So we talked about things like Medicaid and Medicare covering mental health services in the state of Illinois. So those are kind of our biggest concerns right now, is we want to make sure it's affordable, we want to make sure it's accessible, and we want to make sure people know that it's okay to talk about it.
Are you looking for state money or state and national money to help supplement the issue?
I think with the task force, we're focused largely on state budgeting, but this is, of course, not a problem that is unique to Illinois. This is a nationwide problem that affects many communities. Communities like rural communities like ours and communities beyond that.
Well, you were working with the Illinois legislature and Lieutenant Governor Stratton. You guys didn't just work there. You weren't there to learn. It was actually you were helpful in 5 different bills that passed. Can you take us through, some of the bills and the highlights and how proud of you that when you weren't just there to watch, you were involved. I always call boots on the ground, and you did it.
Yeah. A lot of those bills that I helped pass and lobby for were actually prior to my appointment on the Illinois Healing Center Task Force. A lot of them focused on gun violence and LGBTQ plus rights in the state of Illinois. And actually, when I sent you that email, it's now kind of out of date. There's 6 bills now that I've lobbied for that has passed. The state legislature a few days ago passed Karina's bill. And Karina's bill is a gun violence related legislation that protects victims of domestic abuse. So under federal law, domestic abusers cannot own a firearm. Unfortunately, many law enforcement agencies are backed up processing those orders. And so Karina's bill, which was named, unfortunately, after victims of domestic abusers who maintained and kept their firearms, that bill gives more state resources to protecting those families and protecting those victims. And I think that is also tied into mental illness. When we talk about these issues, they're very intersectional.
Interesting.
I like that. And in terms of, I know you were saying like this isn't just an Illinois thing, it isn't limited to that. I saw that you host a podcast and you give outreach to our generation, especially this younger generation who have the resources now to incorporate a mental health toolkit, so to speak. And I want to gauge your experience on hosting that so far and how that experience has been for you.
Yeah. So the podcast, We Are Generation Z podcast, unfortunately, the episodes kind of stalled a little bit after we had some issues with guests and co-hosts. But through that experience, I did get to interview several people who had experiences with mental health and Gen Z. Actually, the first guest was a Sandy Hook survivor. And just hearing her experience and hearing what she went through and continues to go through was heartbreaking. And it was one of those where it's a real gotcha moment, because it's like, there's more that still is to go to make sure that this happens. But I'm working to hopefully get that podcast more widely available and publicized more, because it's part of my mission is to amplify these voices and young people's voices.
In the stuff that you sent me, you put an interesting quote, and I wrote it down, is my job is to represent over 2 million young people in Illinois on or in mental health policy. And when I read that, at first you read numbers, you don't think about it, but then I thought 2 million. That's the reason you're here today, is those 2 million people that don't have a voice like you do today. If you could be talking to all of them at once, what would you say?
Honestly, I would say that everything is going to be okay, because I think so many of us need to hear that right now. I've worked in policy, and I carry that weight during the task force meetings of the millions in Illinois that I'm there to represent. As to my knowledge, when I was appointed, I became the youngest appointed official in Illinois' history. And while ceremonial, that carries an importance that I'm setting a legacy for future generations. I want to be someone who inspires young people to say, I have passions.
Can I interrupt you?
To make this come true. Yeah,
Don't just limit it to young people. Because when you were here when you were 15, I was like, how the heck is this kid 15? And the stuff that you're talking about today, I can guarantee you that I've never done. Mr. Huddleston's next door, and I don't even know if he's done some of the stuff. So don't limit yourself to who you inspire, young man. That's my advice for you.
Well, then I hope to be an inspiration to all.
Exactly.
And I think you are. I mean, 2 million people, that's incredible in Illinois, that need somebody to lean on. And whether that's their therapist or people like you, you're to be commended for that. So where do you go from here? I know you want to graduate and head off to college in the fall, but what's next for Aydin Tariq?
Definitely plan to go to university for political science, but also my activism and my advocacy doesn't end with the culmination or my ending of the term for the task force. My activism and my advocacy continue onward. You asked me what I would say to the 2 million people, or the 2 million young people in Illinois that I represent, and I would tell them it was okay, but I think also that my most important job is also to listen. So many of them have different experiences, and I can't personally represent all of those experiences or bring all those experiences, but I can listen, and I can bring what I learned to those task force meetings and to the state legislature. Next for me is, we talked last time if I was going to run for office one day, and
I think that's a yes, right?
It's very possible. I want to make the change in the world that people deserve to see. I've been very blessed and privileged to have the opportunities that I have in my life, and many people unfortunately do not. And so if I can use what I have to help people who are underprivileged, to help people who need that, then absolutely I'm going to.
Nice.
I want to talk a little bit about working for Lieutenant Governor Stratton for the time when you were on the task force. Can you describe, the everyday stuff and the interactions and her leadership style, and just talk about what it was like for a 17-year-old, I hate to say the word kid, but to me you're still a kid, but a young man, to be working in that kind of environment is pretty incredible.
One point of notion is I am 16 still, unfortunately, and 15 at the time of the appointment. Right. It was kind of awe-inspiring walking through. I'm a big fan of architecture, and walking into the state capitol, knowing that I'm going there to do a job that benefits the people of the state of Illinois, was a remarkable just feeling and experience that you feel wash over you, the grandeur of the building in general. At each task force meeting, I got to make several of them in person. But I also attended several virtually. And so the Lieutenant Governor was present for, I believe, almost all of them, chairing the meeting. And her leadership style, she was very energetic, very charismatic, very kind. She also understood the value of what we were doing. She started each meeting with a wellness checkup with all 28 members on the task force, checking in with them, sharing a mental health experience from her from the previous month. And then also on the task force, I served as the policy chairman of the policy subcommittee. And so through that, we were in charge of writing the policy and legislative portion of the task force's report. So that means when this task force begins into the implementation phase during 25 and 26, the policy that we wrote is going to be the policy that guides that mission forward.
Nice.
It's got to be a good feeling.
It is. It's an inspiring feeling when you've worked with people with so many different lived experiences, so much expertise for so long, and something so hard. When you finally have that final report, it feels good. It feels really good.
That's cool.
I was gonna say, being that being the case, I was gonna ask, how do you measure the success of some of these implemented measures? Because all of them aren't quantifiable in a sense, and they apply to different aspects of people's lived experience, and not necessarily like, oh, I can count how much you earned in 2023, but I can't count how was your anxiety in 2023. So how do you and your team measure, the success or the projected success of some of these measures you're implementing?
Yeah, I think there's two real main ways that we do that. And the first is acknowledging that not everyone's going to have the same response to policy, is that we're focusing on mental health, but also trauma, is that trauma looks so different for so many people, and the response to what we're doing to help them through it looks different for so many people. And so recognizing that we might not get a statistic or something that we could measure for mental health, but rather a feeling or an emotion in the community. The second measure we recognize is that mental health, as I mentioned before, is very intersectional. Communities that lack a lot of mental health care or that deal with more mental illness also see higher poverty rates, and they see higher violence. These are statistics that we can measure. If we look in the end of our current plan, I believe is 10 years, but this is an ongoing mission, is if we look at the end of those 10 years and say, we've seen a drop in these rates as we've increased this, then we will know that our measures are making a meaningful impact in Illinois communities across the state.
You were talking about, sometimes there may be 60, 70 miles before somebody who needs mental health work or talk or an appointment has to be able to get to that person or doctor. What about here in Coles County? What are the avenues locally if someone thinks they're having a breakdown or just wants to talk to somebody? What avenues do they have?
We have many. I can speak specifically to Mattoon as I'm more familiar there, but in Mattoon we have several private counseling options, and then we also have the LifeLink Center. These, of course, do cost money if your insurance doesn't cover therapy. I know that I personally am covered for 10 free therapy sessions per year through my dad's insurance at Lakeland, but not everybody has that opportunity and that privilege. And that is our main focus, is even if it's accessible but not affordable, that's a problem, especially when, unfortunately, Mattoon, a large portion of our community falls below the poverty line. And for those people, putting food on the table, buying a house and a car to get to work, unfortunately, comes first often before mental health care.
Interesting. When you think about this summer before you go off to college, will you visit Spring? Can you go back and talk to some of the people you work with? What are the rules on that since your appointment is over?
Yeah, I plan to continue my work in the state legislature, pushing and advocating for bills and meeting with legislators. Actually, my mission this year, I'm meeting with state senators and state representatives, is to pass through two bills. One that will create a Governor's Youth Advisory Council, and one that hopefully will add a voting youth member to the State Board of Education. What I learned through my experience is that the lack of representation for young people in government is very high. Young people, like I said earlier, make up 2 million people of a state with a population of about 12 million. That's not an insignificant portion of Illinois that isn't, unfortunately, represented in their state government. And so that's my mission for this.
Tough question. Do you feel that there is enough people that are like you that are willing to do something, to be on a committee like that? I mean, from an outside point of view, you seem like one of those wow, but are there a bunch more kids like you in the state that would be able to put together a committee like that?
I actually have gotten this question often. I believe so. I know so. I talk to my friends who are here and the friends at the high school and people I've met through advocacy, and there are people who genuinely want to make an impact both at the state level and even wider. And even students who maybe public speaking isn't their thing, or maybe activism and legislative work isn't their thing. Gen Z has been involved, which is my generation and younger, have been involved in political issues far-reaching. In 2021, it was largely due to our marching and our rallying that helped pass the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. So our actions and our political work, I believe that there are many, many young people who will stand up for that and what they believe in.
Okay, good.
And as a younger person, I can't say I'm as young as you. However, I believe that is the case, and I believe the work that you do also kind of expounds. You set that precedent, and you were talking about how you enjoyed the architecture of the halls walking through, and you contribute to the zeitgeist of what goes on in that building. And unbeknownst to you, that spreads to, people of your generation and beyond, as Jeff was mentioning. And I think there are there is a base of younger people, Generation Z and younger, who have the facilities and who want to learn how to, how to contribute in a manner like how you do, in a significant way. And so my question to you would be, would you have any suggestions on someone who's trying to get started in being involved in legislature or being involved in social change issues, and how they can go about spreading their messages and just getting involved in a way that doesn't seem like rudimentary, like, oh, I'm making TikToks, but I'm not making a difference. I want to be a person making bills or, going to committee meetings and things like that.
I would say that it is easier than people think it is when I sat here 2 years ago with PBS before my work and legislative work, this was my dream. And I ended up here, and I'm very proud of that work. But I would advise those young people, meet with your legislators, find something, start small if it helps, find something that you're passionate about, something that you want to change in the world. Most importantly, believe that you can. Meet with legislators, talk to people, reach out to me if you want to, and try and push for that thing to become reality. I'll also point in 2025 and hopefully beyond, I'm starting working with educators in schools and community organizations in the area in Illinois and hopefully beyond to talk to elementary schoolers, middle schoolers, and high schoolers about my experience working for the state and being the youngest appointed official working in policy, and that if they have passions, if they have dreams, that I'm living proof that their work and that what they can do is unstoppable.
You kind of stole what I wanted to ask you next, but I'll ask you because I know that since you're in high school, I know you talk to other high school age kids. What do they say to you? What do they ask you about the stuff that you're doing? I mean, what do your compadres say?
I think it's very varied.
Very, very,
very varied. Yes, the alliteration there is nice. A lot of people ask me about just my experiences. Many of the same questions that I've been asked sitting here. A lot of them come to me with issues that they want me to bring up to the task force, or that questions. When it was people text me political questions all the time. They asked me about TikTok ban, or I was getting messaged on election night like, what does this mean? And I was answering the questions. So just being that person who can help educate even my friends or peers is a great experience.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask something about like accessibility strictly for young people, because I know like the websites of some of these state officials are not necessarily friendly to navigate. And what I really like about what you're doing is you're really pushing for the exposure for these younger people to, hey, I have a horse in this race too, and I am part of this, and I want to be able to understand, in not necessarily layman's terms, but the younger people have a right to be able to kind of parse through what's going on these websites and in these official documents. So in terms of accessibility, what can you say is like one of the most helpful resources that younger people can engage with in order to kind of learn what's going on and maybe start to form some of those opinions or those ideas or raise some of those issues?
Yeah, I'm going to say that where young people spend the most time is on social media. And that's actually where a majority of young people get both their news and their information right now. And if you can find legislators that have a really good recap on social media of what's happening and the news that they're getting, that's wonderful. And I'm pushing more legislators to create social media sites so they can reach more people. I am also going to be an advocate for PBS again. It was PBS that started my advocacy with the student reporting labs, and that is Gen Z and young people, and Gen Alpha soon, making videos for other young people about politics. When the midterms happened in 2022, they had a whole midterm special. They were live for about 8 hours, 2 young people co-hosting and talking about the midterms and what was happening.
I want to talk a little bit more in depth on, we're talking about mental health a lot with Aydin Tariq today, but what about signs that people need to get involved or intervene? If you know somebody you feel is having a problem, but you're kind of, you talk about the stigma of it. So talk about that. What should we be looking for?
I think a lot of people, if they see signs of a struggle or signs of a mental illness, they doubt themselves and they worry about the friendship. But the reality is that it's not unlikely. a majority of young people, and actually a majority of adults, are believed to have struggled or do struggle with mental illness at some point in their lives, diagnosed or not. Not every person is equipped to handle that. You also have to put yourself first. And so if you see someone else struggling and you don't feel like you're in a place or equipped to help them as best as you can, then feel free to seek them or help them in any way that you can to professional help or to other people, and find community, because community is one of the most important factors of this. Many people feel alone or like they're dealing with their problems and what they're going through alone. And in most cases, that's not the case at all. And so giving a safe, warm environment with community and friends and the people who love and care about you, I think that's one of the most important aspects.
How do you get that started? I think the initial, like, hey, are you all right, Aydin, is the toughest thing for someone to ask, isn't it? So is there, I hate the word cheat sheet on a college campus, but is there a cheat code for that?
I don't know that there's a cheat code to that question, but I think it's something as basic as, I'm going to have empathy and I'm going to check in on my friend, and just saying, like, even if it's not an "are you okay," just like a friend you haven't talked to in a while, hey, just wanted to check in on you. We haven't talked in a while. What's up? Or just a phone call. I think through social media, and this is one of the downsides, I'll admit, as a young person, is it connects us, but it also pushes us further from...
Because God forbid you call them when you text them or message them.
And some people don't like calls, and I respect that. But I think that with social media also, we see a picturesque version of people's lives when that's not always the case. And so just that first introduction is like, hey, how are you doing? We haven't talked in a while.
We got about a minute and a half left. Aydin, anything that we didn't touch on that you would like to talk about today from your point of view?
I just want to say thank you to both of you for having me on the show today, and that I do what I do for the young people, like my friends in the studio and my girlfriend in the studio, my 9-year-old brother, who is part of Generation Alpha, who I want to grow up in a better generation than mine. I was the youngest appointed official, but I don't want to be the last in this state. I want there to be more to come after me.
That's a good answer there. Any last questions, Aaron?
My last one would be, you already expressed the importance of community, and we talked about how this goes further than just Illinois. Is there any way for people to, I know we were talking about the connectivity of social media, but those real in-person relationships to where the community is in your face, is there a way people can go about making, reducing that stigma, reducing that rub in order to address some of these issues?
I think it starts with as close as them, talking about their own issues and checking in on other people, and utilizing social media as well, and the upsides of it as well.
If somebody would want to get a hold of you, is there an easier way? You don't have to get out your number. Should they go through Mattoon High, or how would you like that?
My social media pages is all just my name, and that's probably the best place to reach me. I also have my website at aydintariq.com.
Well, good seeing you again. I know you'll hopefully have you back here soon, and best of luck this year at MHS.
Thank you both.
Welcome for me to hear.